Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for October through January. Over the last 30 days, we've seen very warm temperatures across the Great Basin with almost all areas above normal for the last month, and also very dry conditions, especially across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip into far southern Idaho. Any cold fronts that dropped down, and there were a couple over the last 30 days, mainly affected Idaho, Wyoming, and far northern Utah, bringing some wetting rains, especially to central Idaho. Looking at the precipitation since last October over the last year, we've seen generally very dry conditions with well below normal precipitation across much of Nevada and Utah and the Arizona Strip and southern Idaho. We did have some precipitation late last fall into early winter over the far southern areas of Nevada into western areas of the Arizona Strip. And then more recently, with cold fronts, we've had some precipitation up across central Idaho. Looking at the precipitation that fell over a year ago between 2018 and 2019, this is what produced a lot of our carryover grass crop, especially across parts of Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip. And these fuels will still come into play this fall when we do see continued dry conditions and dry cold fronts move through. We could see above normal fire potential in some areas going into the early part of this fall as winds pick up, as we see a little bit more recreation with hunting in the fall. Looking at our soil moisture, with very dry conditions we've seen, we have very low soil moistures across Utah and across much of central and western Nevada into northern California. Looking at our evaporative demand drought index, we do have more significant drought concerns now across Nevada, southern Idaho, and into northern Utah and the higher terrain of Utah, just with the very dry conditions we've seen and the lack of a monsoon this year to produce any appreciable moisture to Nevada and Utah and Arizona that would normally be expected during the summer months. So we are seeing the lowest drought classification for dryness across much of Nevada into western Utah. Looking at our drought monitor, this is more longer-term drought showing extreme to exceptional drought across Utah into eastern Nevada, and severe to extreme drought extends all the way back into western Nevada and northern California. Not quite as severe conditions up in Idaho, just with some recent moisture especially, but we do have some areas of abnormally dry conditions along with some severe drought and a small area of extreme drought in the areas that have stayed on the drier side. Looking at our current live fuel moistures, the most recent samples we've seen across southern Idaho and similarly over eastern and western areas of the Great Basin, we are seeing sagebrush fuel moisture near or at record lows for the time of year. And this is obviously the story further south. However, we don't have any recent observations over southern areas of the Great Basin. We're not only seeing very low sagebrush live fuel moistures, but also very low fuel moistures in our pinyon, juniper, and in our timber areas. Currently, as of September 29th, our ERCs are indicated here, showing ERCs still above the 80th to 90th percentile over much of Utah into southern and eastern Nevada. We have had some improvement over the far north in central Idaho and over parts of eastern Idaho and Wyoming due to recent moisture with a couple of cold fronts that moved throughout the month of September, bringing cooler temperatures, higher humidity, and some wetting rains. However, warmer conditions and drier conditions have returned, and we will see these ERCs increase through at least the first week or two of October. Looking at some of our ERC charts and how these ERCs are trending towards in relation to normal, you can see up in Idaho where we've seen the biggest decline in ERCs, where we did have some moisture in central Idaho. The ERCs have now dipped down to below normal, and it will take some time for those ERCs to recover. However, further south in southern Idaho and into northern Nevada and Utah, we did see a slight dip in our ERCs just with cooler temperatures, but these ERCs are still well above normal for the time of year and trending upward. Further south over the southern half of the Great Basin, we're still seeing those near or at record highs for ERCs for the time of year. Looking at some of our dead fuel moisture, our 10-hour fuel moisture is still very critical across the Great Basin, especially across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip. And our 100-hour fuel moisture is lowest over the southern half of the Great Basin, which is also seeing similar conditions in our 1,000-hour fuels. However, the 1,000-hour fuel dryness extends a little bit further north, considering these fuels take a little bit longer to respond to any increase in humidity or moisture. We still do have a fuels and fire behavior advisory in the area shaded in red through early October, and this will continue until we see some extended moisture, or at least certainly by the middle of October we'll see longer nights, shorter daytime periods, and that will certainly limit some of our fuel dryness in some areas. Here's a map of our current large incidents across the country. Again, you can see quite a few type 1 incidents across Oregon and still down into northern and central California. The impacts across the Great Basin from these fires is just being blanketed with smoke, especially over western areas. We've been dealing with smoke impacts throughout the month of September and even back into late August, and this will continue going into October as these fires remain active, which will affect temperatures across western and possibly northern areas of the Great Basin. So now that we've looked at where we're coming from, we'll go a little bit further into the future and talk briefly about La Nina and El Nino. Currently, over here on the left side of the map, we are in a weakened state of La Nina, but we will continue to likely cool here going into the fall and winter months, and we will see maybe a more pronounced indication of La Nina as we get into the winter months. And then we could see some warming going later in the winter and possibly back into neutral by the spring or the summer. This does have some implications in the Great Basin, especially in far northern and far southern areas. Typically in a La Nina year, we see wetter conditions over the Pacific Northwest, which also could affect Idaho. We also see a little bit more drying conditions over the southern half of the Great Basin during the winter during a La Nina traditionally. Looking at our 8 to 14 day outlook, taking us through the first week of October, showing warm and dry conditions continuing over much of the West. As we go later in the month of October, we may see a little bit more moisture finally start to work into the Pacific Northwest and northern areas of the Great Basin as we see stronger areas of low pressure bring cooler temperatures and the potential for some precipitation. But at least still the first week or two of October looks very warm and very dry. Looking at the next 3 months from November through January, still looking at more of a warmer, drier signature in southern areas and possibly wetter signature further north. Again, this would be more traditional of what we would see during a La Nina winter. They don't all work out that way, but that is typically what we would see more often than not as far as precipitation patterns for the winter. Now, putting this all together, this is what we are looking at for our October outlook, still keeping the above normal fire potential over much of Utah into southern and eastern Nevada, where we're seeing extremely dry conditions and fuels well above normal and nearer at records for the time of year. We also could have some concerns in the higher terrain of our pinyon juniper or timber areas of the Sierra Front as they remain warm and dry, especially as those initial cold fronts move in and we see that increase in wind with still very dry fuels. So we could have some issues there as well. As we move through November and January, we're expecting more normal conditions, but we will need to watch areas of the Great Basin after dry periods when stronger winds move in with cold fronts. We certainly will still have some carryover grasses and plenty of dormant grasses to deal with that could increase fire potential for shorter periods of time. That concludes our webcast for this month for the monthly seasonal. Check back next month for the latest updates.